Yeah, I'm still Keith from Rampart Communications. Nice to see y'all again. I'm going to do this again. How many of you heard of my company? More than yesterday. You guys have been part of the largest single-day increase in awareness of my company ever. So applaud yourselves if you like. Thank you. Agenda for today. I'm going to reintroduce our company a little bit with a little more detail. I'm going to talk a little bit about the tech that we brought, as a demonstration here, and kind of how we arrived at the sort of multidisciplinary, discovery that we have, why it's useful, why it's practical, why it's secure. It's ultimately going to be a little disappointing. I'm just going to lead with the bad news because I'm not going to go into proprietary information. Sorry, we're trying to build a company out of this, but hopefully it's enough of a taste. Hopefully it gives you kind of a taste of what we do at Rampart that kind of makes you interested, and that's the whole recruiting goal here, right? I'm sure I'm hiring for a lot of the same or similar roles to a lot of the other sponsors that are here today. But the one thing, if there's any daylight between the work that I can offer and theirs, it's that I don't care if you're a PhD, postgrad, or still working on an undergrad, or just coming out of high school. I have something that's new, and you get to work on it. Doesn't matter what you're bringing. I'm gonna be able to teach you something, and we're gonna be able to build from that standpoint together. Okay, so this slide you recognize from yesterday, but I filled in because every nerd wants to fill in all the details of the other intersections here. So Rampart is a multidisciplinary company that does fundamental research in application or infosec, cryptography, and DSP. And to further shed some light on that, you can think of probably some of the intersection between application, infosec, and cryptography, right? Now we're using it now. I'm live over YouTube, over presumably TLS to a lot of the people that are online. Hi, how you doing? So that's a practical, fast implementation of cryptography, and we use it, regularly. Between applications or security and DSP, you have possibly frequency hopping or possibly spreading. There's some, security-like techniques in there, and we'll talk about those a little bit. And then there's between DSP and cryptography. Any physical layer security nerds in the room? Okay, no, all right, good. Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit today, and why it's not the whole picture, why it doesn't have that sort of practical application as of yet. Right, so this is where we are. I've helpfully coded on the bottom left the sort of themes of the individual slides, so you'll know when to kind of tune out or take a one slide nap here or whatever. All right, so quick InfoSec background. We all know the OSI model, right? We all know layer 1 to layer 7, but just to get everybody on the same page. The higher you are, the closer to the user you are. So at the application layer, that's your cat pictures and your memes and videos and stuff like that. And as you go down the application, presentation, ... data link, physical, you get closer to the actual transmission of the data. So everything in between is encoding and encapsulating the data that you want to send, adding routing information, how it gets from point A to point B, how it gets from point A1 to point A2 on its way to B, right? And there's plenty of examples. Again, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but there's plenty of examples of PHY-layer systems, both wireless and wired. Wi-Fi is one. There's standards that kind of pick different ways of doing this, efficient ways of doing it, or just standards of ways of doing it, so we all can interoperate. Acoustic, to stretch the model a little bit further than it probably is supposed to go. I am talking, my brain has thoughts. There's application layer, and I am modulating I'm compressing the air in front of me. This doesn't fit in the OSI model. I'm sad. I'm sorry I went to this, but sound is a physical layer as well. Acoustic is a physical layer, sort of modulation as well. So it's how the bits of a message are actually turned into something other than bits, usually, to be moved from point A to point B. Electrical, electromagnetic. All right, moving into the world of cryptography, they have a model as well, and it's way simpler. You have Alice and Bob, two people who want to communicate. And Alice sends messages to Bob, or sometimes bidirectional, doesn't matter. And you have Eve, or an eavesdropper, in the middle. And the whole goal of cryptography is, how can Alice send messages to Bob over an unencumbered but observable channel by Eve? And sometimes Eve can, there's a character called Mallory who can, inject data or what have you. But Alice needs to send messages to Bob, and don't care how they get there, they just get there, and Eve gets a look at them. And how can Alice do that securely? Definitely a simpler model, and there's a lot more assumptions in here, because the real world is, worse. And Eve exists everywhere, at every layer of the application layer. You can have browser exploits, things that are happening at the application layer. Yeah, that's reasonable. Transport layer things, like messing with how your packets are routed or what have you. And of course, physical layer exploitation, sometimes called baseband exploitation or sometimes just jamming. That's another physical layer exploitation. That's not accounted for in the cryptographic model, but it's relevant and it's important to reality, right? Yeah, moving on. Okay, getting a little deeper into phi layer security as it exists today. This is a subfield of information theory. The field started by Claude Shannon in 48. He started the field, he proved its fundamental theorem in one paper. It's a pretty good day for publishing a paper. But since then, a lot of active research going on here. There's the concept of wiretap security, where Eve gets a look at the channel or gets a look at the information that comes out of the air, wireless being a broadcast medium, right? We have to think about everything that we transmit. It might be available to Eve here, so they're trying to rectify the cryptographic model with the OSI model and come up with something. So the mathy stuff, pardon me if I'm bringing my own particular brand of nerdery to a different brand of nerdery here, but the important part here is that kind of cursive E function, the encryption function there, takes strings of ones and zeros, turns them into strings of ones and zeros of a different length, M or C, and then they're transmitted. And then the channel, the wireless channel that we're all familiar with, has an effect on it. And my inaccurate short summary of phi layer security, and this is, please, there's I'm alighting over a lot of detail here, but is there a way that Alice can pre-code or form her message so that Bob receives it cleanly and Eve has a really hard time receiving or can't receive all of it? And if you think about it, that's not a great sort of standard to set, right? In the pure cryptographic model, it's Eve can look at the message and she can't get anything out of it, otherwise it's not secure. But there's semantics here. There's churn between the two models, right? So we step back to look at sort of the intersection of these two and why physical layer security is attractive at all. And the point is that in reality, in the world of DSP, you're transmitting, and that transmission is, creates some sort of bubble in which it can be heard, right? You have coverage range or some SNR, and depending on your antenna and link margin and all that fancy stuff, you are broadcasting a message. And yeah, you can beamform it, or you can try to point it in certain directions, but you are emitting. And anyone that's inside that emission bubble, or who can buy really good antennas or what have you, can hear you, can be that Eve, right? So physical layer security, the bolded point there is physical layer security tries to recover the assumptions that we make in the cryptographic model, but it falls short. There's a ton of really good work that's going on there. I'm not throwing stones at all. There's not a lot of great practical implementations of it, though. Things that work at gigabit speeds that we talk at over, well, not gigabit, but some of the faster versions of Wi-Fi are getting up there, and 5G is pushing like really high data rates. There's no physical layer security measures for that. And importantly, PLS is expressed in terms of bits. How do we, what's the secrecy capacity, or how do we obscure some of the bits from Eve, not all of them? But the physical layer, as we all know, is the layer of symbols, of complex baseband INQ, right? There's a sample domain or a symbol domain or what have you. And this is something, finally, we're back to safe territory, right? This is good. From left to right in this generic sort of transmitter, you have the application layer, the pictures of cats and what have you, moving down to just before the physical layer, which is where actual physical layer security is applied. The field of physical layer security is typically applied. We pre-code, or we do some clever math to the bits, and then move on to the digital and analog portions of the transmitter. But the physical layer is both the edge of that bit to symbol map on both sides. So it's both the bits and the samples. I put a 16 QAM up there. There's any number of constellation diagrams and any ways of representing that signal. So yeah. Out of order from the order I remembered it in, but sure, we'll talk about it now. Good. Things that are not phi layer security. This is still in the DSP realm, but I just want to mention these because they were in the slide earlier. Spreading and hopping are spreading is a way to more efficiently use bandwidth and reject interference. It is not, in any sense of the word, a security mechanism. And this is the book on why that's true. There's a guy named William Gardner, who wrote literally that book, and he makes cyclostationarity.com, and really kind of demonstrates that there's no security in spreading a signal. You might make it less obvious, but if I'm looking for cyclostationary signals, or if I'm looking for things that are spread or have repeat copies, or even changing repeat copies, there's dead simple ways of finding them. Likewise with frequency hopping, I'm moving a signal around, and sure, I may not be able to see the pattern that you're hopping in, but there's still a signal there. There's still structure. There's still a constellation. The way to win at whack-a-mole is not to get really fast at predicting where the mole is going to come up. It's to get 2 or 3 of your friends and give them hammers, and you all just hit one hole each, right? And you can stop, and you can look at frequency hopping, right? So I just want to point out this is not part of formal PLS, and nor really are there actually true measurable security properties. Yeah, they make frequency hopping is great against jamming because it moves around and the jammer has to follow it. There's no other game there. But effective physical layer security, A, from the cryptographic sense, doesn't make any assumptions about Eve, and B, protects the file layer information, protects actual information of the file layer, not just the information above it, not just bits above it. All right, so we're in the complex, or in baseband and INQ, baseband IQ, which is typically represented as complex numbers. How do I do cryptography here? Right, cryptography in the classical, in the sense we're all familiar with, is plain text bits to ciphertext bits, right? Same length, there's some sort of math that happens, but it's all happening on bits, and it's a really nonlinear process, and you can the acid test here, as I call out, the test of the output of a good crypto system is that if I can give you a file of encrypted messages and a file of random ones and zeros, you can't tell me which file is which, right? So that's easy to do. That's fairly well understood in the crypt world. So what does that mean in C? The PDF isn't rendering that. It's supposed to be, the set of numbers, the set of complex numbers. Anyway, in the complex numbers, well, okay, digital signals we represent as either in serial or in blocks of complex numbers. Thinking about a block of complex numbers or a vector of complex numbers as a band-limited, time-limited, and defined power signal, right? So this should be fairly familiar. If I'm critically sampling a signal, I have all the information I need in that complex representation to make, to represent or to recreate that signal in analog, or to demod it if I'm on the receive side and turn those symbols back to bits, right? So if indistinguishability in the cryptographic sense is I can't tell 2 bit strings apart, 2 files of bit strings apart, then indistinguishability in C means I have a file of Gaussian random noise, random in INQ, and I have a random looking output of a cryptologic, right, that are indistinguishable. So E, this cursive E here, again, remembering from a couple of slides ago, instead of mapping from, vectors of bits, from a plain text to a ciphertext vector of whatever length, I map from vectors of complex numbers to other vectors of complex numbers. And I've highlighted something here, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this, right? So it maps uniformly is underlined and power is highlighted. So bandwidth and duration, that should be fairly clear, right? Complex numbers represent signals with bandwidths and durations. Got it. Like that's how we think of signals now. The magnitude of that vector represents the power in that signal. I can multiply it by 1 billion, and my amplifiers will blow up because that's power going into the amplifiers, right? So that's a scalar of power there, and I want to preserve that power because I don't want to have to change, ideally to not upset the analog front end, developers. I don't want to have to change the front end of the radio, so I want the same power coming in and out. Okay, so I map from the same bandwidth, duration, and power, and then that uniformly word is the key here. How do I uniformly generate signals from given an input? Can I map to an output and do the inverse predictably, computationally quickly, what have you. There are so many wrong ways to do this. This is the fun part of fundamental research. There's a lot of sort of half measures and half ideas out here. I've outlined phase encryption here. So taking QPSK points, just to keep it simple, and say, using some bit stream as the key, change from 00 to 11 and to flop this around unpredictably, not just substitute them. And this is fine on the front of it. Like, there's security. We can see kind of a path to making something secure there, but you still end up with a QPSK at the end. You still end up with something that has 4 distinct points. And does anyone else spot the actual flaw of this? Just going around the room. I want to see how lost I've gone down the path of here. How much security have you added here? So yeah, so presuming you can uniformly, equally map, every baud is mapping to a different key. It's not always, -1 -I going to 1 + I or whatever. The problem with phase encryption is that you've only added, in this case, 2 bits of security. So if I'm Eve, I don't care which one it maps to. I will try every single case for every baud and demap them, and fine, I have 4 cases. I have 2 bits of work that I have to do. We all have computers that can do 2 bits of work, right? So, and scaling with larger constellations. So this is not actually a great security. There's some security in there. Like, it's not nothing. You've also probably introduced a timing problem, right? So if your transmitter and receiver get out of sync and you don't know where, you don't have a way of recovering that, then you're suddenly your intended recipients are having problems demodding as well. So there's 3 principal constraints in actually building this system. Trying to map uniformly to complex vectors. We need it to be fast. We can't break things like the fundamental parts of DSP that kind of have to happen. Equalization, security, what have you. And the cryptologic sort of acid test, indistinguishability. Under Shannon's maxim, which is the enemy knows the system, right? So we can't have any assumptions about Eve being like, well, Eve is far away, or Eve doesn't have the same number of antennas that I do, so that's how I get away with it. You assume an Eve or an adversary with total and complete knowledge of the system. There's nothing obscure about what you're doing if you want to claim cryptographic security. All right, so this is like the super disappointing part. Like, I'm not going to say how we do this. I apologize. I know that may not even be in the spirit of an open source conference. But the point is, like, it's possible, and this is the fundamental advance, right? This is what we've built. We built something that takes any constellation-based signal, which means it's medium independent as well, any constellation, and maps it to random Gaussian noise in order and time. So faster than the, say, Fourier transform that you're probably using if you're building an OFDM system, or at least as fast as the rest of your, sort of DSP transmit chain, transmit or receive chain. We've done it in a way that has 0 impact on the DSP performance side of things. So I've gotten some really, really good questions, and I appreciate y'all coming up and challenging me on this, right? It's a good scientific method, practice thing to do. But there's no feature that is not preserved in this transformation, both encryption, decryption side of it, right? So all these I've gotten questions on all these things. If you can't read them, cluster variance, SNR, PAPR, noise or interference rejection, or performance in the face of noise, and what have you. MIMO, you can still do hopping, you can still spread with this. It's just that this is what, this is the modulation, or this is the underlying encoding, right? And it's provable. Right, so we have the proofs of work under the cryptographic model. You can map it out. We've had independent verification of this, and we're trying to bring it to customers, right? So instead of, and this little diagram at the bottom here, you have a sync pattern, which is not information containing. I can use whatever sync pattern I want. So if I want to look like a Wi-Fi system to an AI, I might put a Wi-Fi preamble on there. If I want to look like, I don't know, Bluetooth or DVB-S or what have you, every non-coherent system has some sort of way of recovering timing, pilots, what have you. That part is how I recover my timing and frequency, and then everything else is encrypted, if you will. And I don't have to encrypt everything. So one of the earliest things that we built was an 802.11 AC system that spoke unitary braid division multiplexing to UBDM clients, and it spoke to your stock iPhone, a normal 802.11, so sort of simultaneously interleaving, right? So I left open some of the parts of Wi-Fi that are necessary to do that sort of management back and forth. So I can build an interoperable system. I don't have to just completely destroy backwards compatibility there too. Cool. So yeah, again, I have a demo out here. I would be happy to have people take me up on the offer to record symbols, because I can't stand up here and I can't prove to you. At first, I mean, it would take 40 hours on a whiteboard and it'd be fun, but I can't compress that to a 30-minute talk. But you can prove some of these things to yourself. You can prove that I'm transmitting noise over the air. You can prove that my signal is in there. I can turn it, our encryption on and off, and you can see that's happening. Happy to do that. I'm a scientist myself, and extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And we live to that standard, right? So to the extent that I can do that without driving my company into the ground, I'm happy to do that, right? But we're trying to make something out of it. All right, backing out to kind of why this stuff matters, and this is an impact statement, and this should be, this is bigger than just the tech here. Anyone recognize the picture in the middle? No? This was pulled from a certain space exploration company's telemetry from their certain bird name rockets, telemetry that was being broadcast down to the Earth by some enterprising SDR enthusiasts. Kudos to you, right? The company was sending both the cool outside videos that you see of the rocket going to space and internal videos of this is the liquid oxygen tank. I would also have accepted, what's the thing from Back to the Future? Flux capacitor kind of looks like that a little bit, but half points for that. But no, this is the inside of a liquid oxygen tank, and that was just pulled out of the air. Satellite in particular has this worldwide sort of coverage area, right? And so worldwide attack surface. So yeah, it might be funny to kind of punch up at the big company that has now put encryption on their telemetry at the MAC layer, I'll say. But your data might go over satellite. If you use satellite internet at your home or whatever. And more importantly are the 4 boxes around it. I love the line from Matthew Van Hoof's Twitter. I found some design and implementation flaws in Wi-Fi again, right? Like, this dude is prolific, and he's finding fundamental, like baked into the ASIC of your phone flaws in Wi-Fi. All your phones are vulnerable to, to some degree or another to these things. And they're largely unpatchable. Microcode sometimes exists to patch these things, but it affects you and I. And so there's huge commercial value in making everyone's communications more secure. It matters to you and to I, and it matters that I can, I don't have to do IT support for my family. I can just say, patch, your communications are secure. I don't want to have to teach somebody how to use Wi-Fi or how to update their WPA2 to WPA3 or what have you, right? Bilayer Security protects everything, every layer above it, which is a fundamental sort of, change in the attack defense thing. InfoSec, my community doesn't do a great job, of defending networks today. We do okay. I'm not throwing stones like it's a huge and hard problem, but giving the attacker the first move by letting them listen to what you're saying is not a winning strategy, right? And there's other, similar exploits in Bluetooth and other baseband exploits. The last point I want to say about this is I've been talking in the sort of sense of I transmit and it's now secure. Cool. What happens when I receive, though? What's the first step I receive? So the samples come down to a baseband processor, in general terms, right? Those baseband processors are the things that are getting exploited, right? So not only are my transmissions secure with UBDM, but if the first step in receiving is to decrypt, not demod, you are invulnerable to baseband exploits now. So there's a dual sort of sides of this protection that come in here. So this is what we're doing. We're killing, we're stopping baseband exploitation. We're unlocking new things. I'm looking at commercial applications for IoT, the things we know about, and then the things that are down the road, not so far away. I'm fine with a pacemaker that like chirps out its battery status or what have you. But how many of you would, roger up to have something, an implanted device that talks Bluetooth to it and says, hey, update your firmware or whatever? Like that's certainly a different, sort of step to take, right? So these are the sort of privacy and security implications that I'm thinking about and that we're aiming for at Rampart. So yeah, so that's my talk. Hopefully it was not so disappointing, but interesting. And if you want to work with this, if you want to build things that meaningfully improve privacy as well as security at the phi layer, and you're a DSP nerd in be it PhD or in high school, like we're hiring and we're looking to sort of innovate in a lot of different ways in this space. So we'd love to chat. We'd love to talk about our demo. Yeah, great to hear from you. Thanks. I'll take your questions.
All right, any questions in the room? There's a couple on chat that I'll relay here if there's no questions here. Oh, yeah, Neil.
Maybe this is kind of an obvious question, but how does this sort of thing hold up to different types of channel impairments like noise and fading and multipath and stuff?
There is zero difference between an existing system, whatever notional system we're talking about operating in those channel environments, and a system plus our modulation. It absolutely zero impacts. It is lossless in the same sense that a Fourier transform is lossless. You don't think about, oh, I'm going from frequency to time domain and I'm losing bandwidth, I'm losing information about my signal. The Fourier transform is unitary, and that is the fundamental reason why it's lossless, and we are unitary, and also the fundamental reason why we are lossless as well. So whatever effect that channel would have had, if it would have completely wiped out that signal, it would have wiped us out too. We're not magic. Let's get that out there. Yeah, so no effect. Yep.
So a question on the chat from Marcus. How would equalization happen then if you don't have those modulation properties?
Right, it's a great question. There was the diagram earlier on here. Oh, here it is at the very bottom of the slide. There, I still use a sync pattern to achieve timing and frequency correction and equalization, but there's no information in that. It's the same pattern every time, or it changes depending on which modulation we're talking about. But I can then change it because I have a secure channel underneath. So if I wanted to change that every time, or if I wanted to do weird things with that, I could. But I perform equalization the same way you perform equalization now on whatever notional system we're thinking about. Yeah, good question.
Right. And there's another question online. Is there any public research papers about these general techniques? Like UBDM
right.
in the question.
Right. So again, this is new science. This is my company's sort of innovation. We have patents. They're inscrutable. I wrote them, and then the lawyers rewrote them. You're happy to read them. But we're not publishing anything right now. We have a white paper that kind of goes into a little bit more detail on our website, but unfortunately I have to disappoint in that answer. There's not anything. Come work with us. You get to see it all, but then, yeah, good plug.
All right, cool.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Keith.